Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Huang Lynch, and I'm the content manager for the Center for Asian American Media. We just watched two amazing food documentaries, um, Bloodline and Running a Restaurant During the Coronavirus Pandemic. And I want to welcome you to our conversation about food and community. And we're going to be talking to two of some of the boldest voices in food in the Bay Area. So it's going to be a great conversation. Right now, I would like to invite our guests onto our screen. We have Chef Tu David Phu. Hi, Tu. And we have filmmaker Jun Stinson, who is the director of Running a Restaurant During the Coronavirus Pandemic, which features Chef Reem Assil of Reem's California Bakeries in Oakland and San Francisco. Glad you guys can join us.
Hi, Chris. Super happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I guess maybe start us off. Maybe we can just chat a little bit about how you are doing today, and given the pandemic, and we've been talking about the pandemic during these movies. If you could just briefly just give us a little bit of an update on how you are. Go ahead, too.
Okay. 2020 has been very difficult for myself as a person of color, a marginalized community in the food space. And I would say it's the same for a lot of my colleagues as well. It's 2020 sucked. Big time. And I think that's for everybody, but I think being the person that I am, being the person that Reem is, when there is pain and when there is suffering, we kind of like take that on as a community. And that's what I've been doing all of 2020 and 2021. So I would refrain from saying that I'm good, but I am pretty sure that we are in a place of healing and we want to heal more as of 2020.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Right. So
June, how about you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Reem's not here. I'm hoping Reem will be able to join the call. She's not available at the moment, but we're trying to get in touch with her. But in terms of being a filmmaker and a producer, it definitely has been a challenging year. When we went into lockdown, production stopped. There was a lot of fear and unknowns in terms of how to do what we do safely. And so, and that's something I can talk about a little later too, in terms of the decision of working on this particular story in the early days of lockdown. It took many months for us, for many of us to feel comfortable and safe, not only for our own well-being going out and producing, but also for the well-being of the people we're making stories about. And so it has been really challenging. And for, a lot of filmmakers out there who are independently working, it also meant that a lot of work shut down. So it's been a really tough year for a lot of people in the filmmaking community.
Right, I know. Yes, and like you said, we will have a chance to ask questions, talk a little bit more about that. I do want to backtrack and let people know that we are watching, this is a live conversation and we are all here live. So if you're watching at home, you have a chance to also add your thoughts to the conversation. You can type them into the chat box, and we will have a time to pass on your questions to our guests and to be able to talk about the things that come to mind for you. And I did want to note that Reem, like you said, Reem isn't able to join at the moment. Hopefully she'll be able to join before the end of our conversation. And the filmmakers who created Bloodline with Chef Tu David Phu, Santhosh Daniel and James Q. Chan. They are also not having good internet connections right now. They're not able to join us. I do have a statement to read because I know Santhosh really wanted to be part of this conversation. So I would like to just share a little bit of that. as we get started. Actually, you know what, Tu, why don't you start? And then I'll share the message from Santhosh a little bit later. But maybe we could start by talking a little bit about how the connection was made between yourself and the filmmakers. Take us back to that time that you first met Santhosh at the dinner that you were catering, and describe how that played out.
Absolutely. So I met Santhosh about three years ago at a SF Design Week event. And SF Design Week is a event that's held here in San Francisco, and people from all over the world, all over the nation, kind of participate to kind of support the creative space for design, whether it's in linens and fabrics or architecture and kind of everything in between. And they wanted to, as they have always had, extend opportunity out to people in the community who had creative offerings. Their connection to me was through 18 Reasons. 18 Reasons is a nonprofit organization that exists in San Francisco on the Mission, and they offer resources for people like myself to teach classes, to learn more about community, to learn more about food, and kind of everything else in between. And through that connection, I guess they were looking for a chef to kind of tell a story and cook inside of a bank vault, which is kind of unheard of. And just kind of given that sort of context, I thought it'd be a fun opportunity. Santhosh came in to be a director / producer for.
He was making a video about that experience, right?
Correct. And just through genuinely talking about food, at that time, he had just lost his father. And during that sort of stage of my life, I was talking about my parents and their experience in diaspora. So there was this beautiful connection in, there was this symbiosis sort of feeling about lineage, culture, heritage, and food. And as that conversation grew, we became really close friends. We started to exchange more stories. I cooked with his mom. He came and met my family. And at some point we were like, we should film this and put it on, make a video out of it. I met James. James had just released this film, Forever Chinatown. He is of Vietnamese diaspora as well. We connected immediately and just brought our friends together to film this sort of story around my family and around his mother, and kind of see where it goes. And we submitted into CamFest. Next thing you know, KQED PBS was interested, and it just started gaining tons of momentum. And at the end of the day, we weren't trying to find a cool story to tell. We just wanted to be honest. We wanted to give voice to stories to certain people, in particular our mothers, that people wouldn't hear about. If anything, for Santhosh and myself, and James as well too, it's in a way of helping my parents, helping myself, helping his family document, this moment in time and place. And whether it did well or not, all through the exhausted hours of us trying to get this film off the ground, it was absolutely well worth it, because I can always go back, opposed to reading a book, but see a film of my parents in that time and place, the things they talked about, things they would say on camera that they would never say to me.
Oh, I do want to talk a little bit more about family in a minute, but maybe we can start at the beginning also with Jun, and maybe you can take us back to the early days of the pandemic when you were filming with Reem, and describe how this came about. And was this something that you were, because it came about very quickly at the beginning of Shelter in Place, and tell us how that worked out, and if this is something else that you had planned that pivoted to a pandemic story. How did that work out?
Yeah, so essentially, for weeks we were hearing about this virus and not sure if it was, going to come here to first the U.S. and then, to California and our own community in the Bay Area. And there was so much that so many of us just didn't know. And, then then shelter in place happened, and still, you know, I think a lot of people were in confusion. How long is this going to happen for? Is it going to be a couple weeks? Is it going to be a month? And one night I'm on Facebook and I'm just kind of scrolling through, and I see this post by Reem. It was a video, and it was just a very desperate plea. And you know, lockdown had just happened, and she had just opened her restaurant in the Mission, and you know, I could just sense the stress and the concern in her voice. And I didn't know Reem personally before making this film, but I had been following her work and her trajectory and her restaurant for many, many years. And that was that was one of many wake-up calls, that this was really serious, that this was going to have a huge impact on our community. And, you know, for me, being born and raised in Oakland, I've just always, I've followed, you know, Reem's restaurant in the Fruitvale over the years, and have just really appreciated her contributions to the community. And for me, that was just a wake-up call, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And so, you know, that
Jun, I have to ask, that video that you described, was that video the cell phone video that we see in the documentary?
That was one. I started with it. So Reem had actually, thanks for asking that. Reem had actually started a GoFundMe to support, I believe, her new restaurant. That transitioned to, you know, needing support because of the pandemic and because of lockdown to support her workers. And so it was just a GoFundMe video that she had posted on Facebook. And so that video actually inspired me to reach out to Reem and ask, would she be willing to document the next couple weeks via cell phone through video diaries. I didn't have any funding to do this project. I didn't have a secure outlet. I didn't know who the audience would be, although I knew this was a really important story to document. And she said yes. And I give her so much. I commend her for that, because she was in a very vulnerable spot as a restaurant owner. And, you know, dealing with tremendous stress at the time. And she was open and willing to document her, you know, evenings sitting down at the end of the day to just kind of talk about what was happening with her business, and some of the like ethical decisions she was really
about whether she was putting the workers at risk.
And so while she did that, you know, we would reconnect every few days, and she would send me these videos, and I would watch them through and ask her questions. And then I was reaching out to different outlets, seeing if anybody would be willing to take the story that, you know, I just felt was important in documenting what was happening in our community here, but was really a reflection of what was happening across the country. And I do want to say that in part because of ADOC, I was able to get in touch with Christopher Kim, who's at the New Yorker. You know, I was putting call outs everywhere, just seeing who could take the story. And he reached out, and we had a conversation, and he was really interested in the film. And so then I had secured, you know, an outlet for the story. And him, as well as, you know, my editor, Jean Kawahara, who's based in Berkeley, who I worked on, who's editor of my film Futbolistas for Life, and then Sean Havey, my DP, you know, they all just kind of jumped on board right away. I give Sean so much credit because, again, it was pretty hard to find a DP, because early days of the pandemic, a lot of people didn't want, you know, they didn't want to go out, and they were scared for their own health. They were scared about the health of others. So Sean had been shooting already outdoors on the film Homeroom, which is about high school students in Oakland, that played at Sundance this year. And so he had sort of a protocol down in terms of how to film relatively safely.
Right. So actually, we have a question along those lines from someone in our audience. Terry asked to you, Jun, I love your film. What was the hardest part of filming during the pandemic?
I mean, luckily, I set it up because Reem had done these video diaries. That was a big part of the film. And I had asked her to do that because I was also for a couple of weeks trying to figure out the ethics of filming and how I felt about that. But I was able to set it up so we only had one day of shooting, and I had a really small team. It was me and Sean. But that was, there were so many unknowns at that point. Yeah. So that really was probably the hardest part, was first finding a DP who was willing to go out with me. And then kind of figuring out our own protocol, because none had been made for the industry in terms of safe practices.
What it looks like do you wear a mask? Do you use like a long boom? Do you
totally?
Take some
and I actually
distance?
Was reaching out to people in China and Hong Kong, and producers and journalists I knew were passing information on to me in terms of what filmmakers there were doing to stay safe. And so I, incorporated those suggestions into what we ended up doing.
That's great collaboration. Yeah, I like that. Tu, I'm curious, I know you mentioned when we did another interview for an article that's on the Caam Media website, and you mentioned that at the beginning of the pandemic last March that you and Santhosh and James were ready to embark on a bigger project. And can you describe for our viewers right now what happened to that?
Absolutely. Well, we had a TV show that was based locally, specifically in Oakland, that we were going to start filming in 2020. And that sponsorship came through, and the funding came through Visit Oakland. And given that Visit Oakland is a heavily based in tourism, the day that shelter in place got issued in March, we called them to confirm, and they had to withdraw their funding. So we were really heartbroken, but at the same time, I feel like the universe is never a linear thing. It makes you go through twists and turns. It makes you go backward, and it forces you to go backwards sometimes just for you to be able to get to the places where you want to go. So it hurt very, very bad. But at the same time,
I'm sure it was so disappointing. I can imagine.
Absolutely. But we had a foot in our door, and I think opposed to seeing the failure of opportunity, but more so seeing that the opportunities that open up for us that we just need to revisit when the time is right. So.
Well, speaking of twists and turns, I just got a message that Reem is now able to join us. So I'm going to welcome Chef Reem Assil to join our conversation. Hi, Reem.
Hi. I am so sorry.
Oh, no worries. I know.
The vortex of restaurants.
It's a busy life running a restaurant. So we just went over the beginning of how the film came about. And I'm wondering, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what it felt like, from your end to have these very vulnerable moments documented, and to be, either making your own videos and talking into your phone, or having a camera crew come into your restaurant in your home to, to observe and to be able to follow you along that point in time.
Well, I would say that these opportunities are really like, it's what I needed in the moment. It was almost like if I wasn't talking into my phone, I was going to be talking to the wall. and driving myself mad, to be quite honest. It was I don't think anybody in the industry would tell you that it wasn't a scary time for them. Intellectually, these systems were like set up to make you fail, or like, I understood sort of at a very high level, but in sort of being in the thick of it, feeling like a failure and like internalizing that, and just to the point of paralysis where I couldn't show up for myself or the people around me. And so I feel like it was a saving grace when Jun, I threw out the Hail Mary of that GoFundMe, which I'm really embarrassed about.
You shouldn't be embarrassed. That was such a scary time. I think watching the movie in 2021, I even felt the difference in the tone and kind of the atmosphere of, you really captured that complete uncertainty and the complete feeling of being unmoored and not even knowing whether our lives would be able to go on the way that we know.
Yeah, there was an element of rawness. I feel like, for me, it was therapy, being able to document for the record. This was what was happening with me. I think as a business owner, people don't know what's happening, and it just shows like the humanity, the humanness of like, and to be quite honest, it was complicated, me going out into the world and being like, I feel like a failure and I'm a failure. And then, my employees finding out about it after the fact and just being like, what's going to happen to us, So I think it's messy. And I think that the New Yorker piece did show a little bit of that messiness. It wasn't just like clean cut, I'm going to like get out of this. I think it ended with a little bit of like, this is the humanity of it all. We're just trying to figure it out.
We are all trying to figure it out.
Yeah. For me, it was really therapeutic. Yeah. I feel like I needed that at the time to feel seen and heard. And just to like say it out loud, what I was going through, because especially I think as women and women of color, were like up until that moment just like expected to like excel and never fail. And it's like, here's for the record in front of thousands of people, like I feel like a failure.
Oh, Reem, since you mentioned all the pressures on women, I am very curious about the work-life balance, because you show, we see your cute little son in the movie, and he's so young, and we know that the pandemic has had such a toll on especially working moms trying to juggle running any kind of in any line of work, and then having children with no childcare and having that element. So could you talk a little bit about how that affected your year?
Yeah. I mean, in honesty, I think it was like a real blessing for me. I was running on fumes. I mean, I literally opened a restaurant 2 weeks after I had my child. I think in the first year of Zane's life, he had been on 18 flights, before he turned.
Wow.
I was saying yes to everything because I had internalized that I might never get a chance, to have opportunities. And for someone like me, who's the primary breadwinner of my family, we're a one-income household. I'm really lucky that my husband, loves caretaking and is the sort of primary childcare. But I also forewent sort of a relationship with my son. I remember those weeks after the pandemic, and he didn't want me. He was like, I want to be with Baba. And that killed me, because it's like I have my workers who think, I have
heartbreaking
that I'm a failure, and then my child doesn't want to be around me. And so, I got to like reestablish my relationship to my son in his formative years. He had just turned 2, and now I would say we're like best friends.
So maybe that's some silver lining.
More. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the status of your restaurants? We saw that they were transitioning to doing different kinds of commissary work. Can you give us an update about what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I think, Jun, I don't even know if we talked about sort of worker co-op transition at that time. I that whole sort of first few months were like a big blur to me.
You were bringing it up at that time.
Yeah, just like, I'm curious, I think I just kept going back to like, I don't want to go back to the way things were. Like, I was miserable leading up to the pandemic. From the outside, you look like it's so successful and she's opening up another location. But in reality, I was trying to open up another location to stabilize one location that the real estate wasn't sort of giving me enough volume, and we needed to do catering. And this is how like capitalism works, and you just got to keep, and my husband would joke like, keep going on your gerbil wheel.
So describe, maybe not everybody knows what a co-op is. So could you briefly describe how that works?
Yeah, I mean, so I knew that the model of the restaurant industry was not something I wanted to go back to. And yet I think that I didn't want to have to figure it out on my own. And so, by definition, what worker cooperatives are is the collective ownership and governance of a place by all the people who work there. So everybody gets a vote and a say in how the business runs. And everybody gets some piece of ownership of it, a stake in it, be it monetary or otherwise. And to me, it was really important not to have to figure that stuff all on my own. I had been part of the cooperative movement. I used to work at the renowned, Arzmendi Bakery and Pizzeria for 3.5
co-op.
Another co-op that, I think that a lot of those values that I learned sort of in my formative years of baking and learning how to be a business owner, I brought to Reem's. And so I was like, why wouldn't I just make this official? I really believe that right now, and what this pandemic really sort of solidified me. And I already had been thinking about it leading up to the pandemic. Reem's had a 10-year vision to be worker owned eventually. And it was like, build it for them and then sort of sell it to the workers. And I was like, why don't I just have them build it with me?
So you're just doing it as it goes along.
Yeah. I'm like, right now we need to build collective wealth, and it needs to reflect the communities that we're in. And there's no better way than to center workers at the heart of that, because otherwise then you just tokenize workers, and you're seeing this in the media, right? Like, workers are either they're like this romanticized essential worker, or they're like this lazy worker who doesn't want to work, right? Like that's the dichotomy of people in the food industry, and it's ridiculous. And I really want to change that. We are the people who built up this industry. We're going to be the ones with the solutions to bring it out. And so the only way I felt like bringing workers at the center to figure out the solution of that without tokenizing them was to give them ownership of that. So that was sort of what drove me to this idea of a model of shared participatory sort of management and governance, ridding of some of these toxic hierarchies that are found in kitchens that, really were quite harmful for Black, Indigenous people of color in the country. It's the history of it. So how do we unlearn and heal from that? And that's sort of the journey that Reem's is on. And, we, from the time of the New Yorker piece, we just dove hard into the mutual aid work. And that has now become forever a part of our work. Like, restaurants have a responsibility to feed folks, the most vulnerable in our population. Like, that is a role that we have to imagine what hospitality looks like. We are that bridge between the divide of the haves and the have-nots. And Reem's already did that sort of unofficially, and now we're just being more just like transparent about it. It's like
that's so inspiring.
Subsidizing us to pay
Thank
for
you.
someone who cannot afford a manouche, because the true cost of that manouche allows me to pay my workers well. So yes, that's what's happening in Fruitvale, and we transitioned into a wholesale. The other sort of thinking about sustainable business models that isn't just reliant upon this sort of really hard customer base. You can't, like, customers basically dictate people's livelihoods, and it's not fair.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we like sort of pivoted into the wholesale and launched a whole wholesale line. And the mission, we continue to be a restaurant.
Okay.
And, on the up and up, we're, our workers are safe. That's like, we're like 5 steps behind everybody. We still haven't done indoor dining. We just really want to make sure that as we're building up the restaurant, that we don't fall into these same old patterns, that just because everybody else in the restaurant industry is doing it, we have to do it. So
yeah, and that takes courage, and I think that things will happen in time.
Exactly, we're taking our time with it.
We do have a lot of questions from our audience, so I am going to start sprinkling in some questions from people at home. And one of the questions from Abby is, and this can be for either Tu or Reem. She said, "I'm worried about our local restaurant industry, and what can we do to help?" Tu, do you have some thoughts to share about that?
Just to be very transparent, I don't have a restaurant myself because I haven't been able to find a formula that works, that felt ethical. And in my friendship with Reem, and I are constantly talking back and forth, and to give Reem praise as well too, she's literally laying the brick for her own road. And it makes me admire her that much more. And I just want to add to Reem's vision as well, is that Reem is doing all of this by herself with the support of a community. Other people, when they build infrastructure in this regard, say like Elon Musk or whoever else, when they lay their own brick and road, they have millions, hundreds of millions, and billions of dollars for people to advise, people to test out your concepts and kind of everything in between. And Reem, once again, is doing that with the support of her community, and I think that's just so amazing. And the energy and the willingness and the commitment that she's been able to put into a project like this, I commend her. And for myself, I just haven't been able to figure it out. It is, and Reem is right, just to echo what she says as well too. Our food industry is completely broken.
Tu, even though you don't have a restaurant, you are doing other, you're pursuing other avenues. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the avenues that you are pursuing.
Yes, I will get into that. If I could just mention, and I like to call people out. I try to charge $10 for a banh mi. And by charging $10 for a banh mi through a pop-up, I wanted to pay my pop-up event staff an equitable, livable wage. And I continually, to this day, back then as well too, get people messaging me infuriated, stating, how dare I charge $10 for a banh mi? And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but that's the challenges Reem and myself have been challenged with. Reem has found a way to make it work for her. I just haven't found a way to make it work for myself. But like I said, she's laying brick for her own road, and I can imagine a lot of other chefs, including myself, using her as reference, using the work that she did as reference. My other projects, I fully pivoted over to doing more media stuff, providing content, whether it's photo, short video format, via social media. In addition to that, on the side, I find myself working on a few film projects as a co-executive producer, which I can't mention yet, but
we can't wait to hear. A related question from an audience member named Lynn. She asks, having a more equitable food scene is so important. What are ways we can uplift women and people of color chefs and entrepreneurs? Are there any thoughts to add for, specifically for chefs that come from these backgrounds?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, and sort of dovetailing with the previous question, it's like, I think that we really have to be thinking about where we spend our dollars. I mean, it's really a reality that even though I'm making the road by walking, the resources, people need to put their money where their mouth is. And so thinking about sort of where do I choose to spend my money? How do I choose to, do I use the DoorDash app that's so convenient but extractive, or do I just call up the restaurant directly? Those even to those micro decisions really sort of make a difference for us small business owners. But I also think like we all have a role and a platform and a community that we're connected to. And so to use those to uplift women and people of color, if you're inspired by the work that we do, repost it, reshare it on social media, help us get our stories out. I think storytelling has been sort of the thing that, and I think that was a byproduct of my business. Like my language was food, and then the words came after that. It's like it was a journey. But that moves people, moves people to support. And I think the third thing is like to really think about reimagine what hospitality is. It's never going to be the way it was, like we got rid of tipping and we have a 20% service charge now. And, for every like person who's like a curmudgeon about it, we get like another, 2 or 3 people who are also like tipping on top of the service charge,
Wow.
I think there's a shift. And people understand what the true cost of food and what is going in. They feel themselves to be part of the community. And going to restaurants is a privilege. It's a privilege that like we should like put currency into that, ecosystem, because it's going to come back to us tenfold.
I think people have learned that.
Purpose.
I think people are starting to learn that, because when restaurants were shut down to a large extent earlier in the year, people started to realize how much they missed them, and that if they wanted to, help businesses survive, that they can vote with their wallets and give their money to the businesses.
And the ability to I'm just going to chime in, like the ability in your case with Reem's is like to just have incredible, delicious access to this food from Palestine and Syria. And, just like it's so, and hearing you talk about it, Reem, when I was interviewing, it's just like your food and what Reem's represents is so rooted in who you are. And your connection to your homeland, and that all of us as members of the community can partake in that and be someone like me from Oakland, and my background is not connected to these places, but I have the opportunity to partake in just like the richness and the deliciousness of this history. So
yeah, that's a great point.
And if I could just add to that as well, too, that's what you can do from a consumer side, but I think it's equally important to do it from an entrepreneurial side, too. And Reem has advised me so much on this as well, is that a lot of companies, a lot of brands, and this is a few years back, Reem educated me on the term tokenization, and the nuances of it and picking that up. But whether it's a nonprofit organization or a for-profit organization, if you're interacting with them, you find that their culture or what they represent is fully patriarchal and non-diverse, and it doesn't reflect in the ethics in their own business, yet they're reaching out to you to represent that. I think that's been a huge learning lesson I learned from Reem, is that it's not just from a consumer standpoint. If you have the privilege to own something, to run something, to interact with other brands, to represent your own brand, to build your own team, you need to make sure that those values aren't just represented in things you consume, but yourself as a provider, if you will.
So you as a business owner, you carry some weight and you carry influence, and you can choose how to use it.
Absolutely. I think it's I think it has to work both ways. For it to work one way just doesn't work. I think if anything, then you yourself would be tokenizing. If you are supporting those small businesses, so you can look good as a consumer, but at the end of the day, you're not reflecting those same values to your own business, then, you know, are we really getting anywhere?
Mhm.
Another current event-based question that we have from the audience, Hannah asks, 2021 and 2020 have been extremely challenging between the pandemic and the rise in anti-Asian violence. How do you see those experiences informing the future of your careers moving forward?
I guess I should start. And Reem mentioned this earlier. This is a term that I wouldn't imagine using as much going into 2020 and 2021, but erasure. And I think more than ever, what we've inherited generationally from generations past, whether you're a native here or refugee or immigrant, is the silence that Reem has felt as a Palestinian. And I learned about that through Reem, just through our friendship. And in the beginning, I was struggling to understand what Reem's community, Reem's lineage, cultural, her existence, on how she felt and the struggles that she went through, because I didn't hear her struggles through other places in the community or in the schools that I went to or the history books that I read. And it was this alternative narrative that I never heard before, but I sat down and learned it with her. And similarly enough, I felt that sort of erasure that Reem felt when these crimes, upticks of crimes have been exploding because of COVID and Trump, and not to get political. And then no one was talking about it, you know? And when I would voice my opinion and my concern about people in my community, my wife, my mother, my nieces, my nephews, who I'm afraid for their safety when they go out to public, people would, people in my own industry would say that's not accurate. You guys, there's nothing happening to the Asian community. And I felt that very similar narrative when Reem told me that, when we first initially met, about her home country, her family, and how they were being erased. And I just want to make this very clear. I'm not trying to suggest this is like a QAnon thing where it's like fake news. I'm talking about specific individuals, in my own community, in the public community abroad, where they just refuse to either acknowledge or even to hear or see what's going on. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
so we're getting near the end of our time for our discussion, but I feel like we do need to give Reem a chance to speak, because I want to acknowledge the pain that's happened in Palestine recently, and especially you mentioned in the film that you would like your bakeries to be a place for Arab hospitality and to be a gathering place for the community. So would you be able to briefly share some thoughts with regard to that?
Well, I would say we're just like, for all the devastation that's happening in our communities, I think never, ever have we been more connected. If it took a pandemic to help us make those connections, so be it. I've never felt more connected to how we are going to have collective liberation among all of our communities. The connections are so clear. So I want to say that. I want to say that, as chefs and as people in the public, that have had the privilege to have sort of a public platform, I'm trying to pave a path for my community to be able to control our narrative. Because if you don't tell your story, somebody is going to tell it for you. And that has been my quest, to sort of make path for people to tell their stories in a way that I wasn't growing up. And we have all that intergenerational trauma, and the silence is being broken, and we're finally starting to talk and heal, and it's going to be messy to rebuild, but I believe now more than I did maybe 5 years ago, that collective liberation is in our stuff. It's written in our our story, and same sort of forces that are causing violence against Asians in this, and violence against Black folks in this country, and violence against immigrants are the same forces that are occupying my folks in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank, in Israel. So we're making those connections, and we're saying that we want to tell a different story. Like, what we want to come out of this pandemic is not just resilient, but thriving. Like, to have to be resilient all the time is a burden, actually. We just want to live in dignity, and I feel now more than ever that we are sort of connected in that fight, and there is finally traction, and our stories were the way to sort of break that dam a little bit. So now we're just pushing to sort of break that dam open.
Well, thank you both of you, all three of you are so articulate. I did want to share some words from our directors who were not able to join, but they did send us a message. This is from Santhosh Daniel. A deep and heartfelt thanks to Caam for curating this special event, which I would have loved to attend were it not for my current travel schedule. And although neither I nor James Q. Chan are able to be there, I would like to mention that knowing the theme of this panel and presentation is community and food, were it not for the Caam community, especially Don, Masashi, and Stephen, who were friends for many years before also becoming our producing partners via Caam, and who supported this film from inception in 2018 through the challenges that occurred during the pandemic, all the way to our current distribution via the PBS network. This film would never have been completed, nor would it have reached the success it has had to date. When we talk about community, true community, Caam is the definition of that. And what we mean, and were I not traveling to celebrate my mother, who was the inspiration for the entire series by which this film and other films are made, and her milestone birthday this week, I would be there to say this all in person. That is from Santhosh Daniel. And then we also have a message from James Q. Chan, who says, please share with the audience that I'm on location due to connectivity issues, and he's not able to join. The entire Bloodline experience was a joy, and I will have a permanent place in my heart because of Chef Tu and his family. So yeah, those are some really lovely thoughts from both of them. Quickly, would you be able to tell us how we can follow each one of you, either for the future of your films or just for yourselves as creatives?
Me?
June, maybe maybe you could start.
So if you weren't able to catch the film earlier, it's on the New Yorker, so you can just if you could Google Reem's name plus the New Yorker, you can probably find it there. And you can follow my work on my website, which is junstinson.com, or follow me at Jun Stinson is my Instagram and Twitter handle.
Tu, how about you?
You guys can check me out on my Instagram at Chef Tu David Phu. And for all film links, everything that you need to want to know, from resources from events that I hold, pop-up dinners, everything in between, go to cheftu.com. That's CHEFTU.com.
Thank you. And Reem?
You can follow me on Instagram at reem.assil. And if you want to also know about sort of my whereabouts and projects I'm working on, you can go to my website at www.reem-assil.com.
And where are your restaurants, Reem?
Oh, yes. You can also find me at IRL.
And are they both open?
Yeah. So our Mission location is open 5 days a week from Wednesday through Sunday. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. And our Fruitville location is still sort of operating as a wholesale commissary kitchen. But there's some good news around Oakland, so stay tuned. Nothing I could say now, but
okay. Well, thank you all for being part of this conversation about food and community. And I feel just a wonderful sense of community listening to all of the inspiring things that you have to say, and can't wait to follow all of your projects as they move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.